Welcome everyone.
Thank you.
And first of all, I have to say congratulations to all of you, because according to Rabbi Steinsaltz, he's not the only one who says this, but he said it, that communities, Jewish communities, are supported by the Torah learning that goes on in them, and for the fact that we have a group of women who are doing their part, you deserve a lot of credit for that. So thanks to everybody for showing up, and hopefully it'll be worth your while. So we're starting this time. This is actually the 6th year that Middle and I have been doing this. A few years we did it in Boca, 3 years here. And this is the first time we're starting from the very beginning. We're starting from the very beginning of the Gemara. And since we have an opportunity to start from the beginning, I asked Rabbi Billick to give an introduction to what this is all about. So, Rabbi Billick.
Okay. Maybe the instruction was unclear. I wasn't sure if you wanted me to give an introduction to Berachot or an introduction to Talmud study. Which one was it? Okay. Well, I wasn't intending to give an introduction, but I'll try to pull it off. I'll make it about both. I wanted to share with you 2 passages that I found in articles that I have at home, written by Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, about Torah study in general, or Talmud study, if you will, and relating it to women specifically. And these articles were written probably in the early 80s, so maybe they're a little dated, but just to show you where he was thinking at the time, and on this topic. So this first one was, the article was called Talmud Torah, and at the end of it, Rav Lichtenstein wrote the following. He said, noting that the mitzvah of Torah study in general, this is the way he puts it, as a normative mitzvah, it devolves only upon Jewish men. For others, it is regarded in part as an admirable aspiration, and in part as a means for acquiring the knowledge requisite for the fulfillment of other mitzvot, but not as a duty to pursue knowledge for its own sake. Moreover, concern lest half-baked knowledge be abused has, at times, actually led to discouraging such voluntary study. And this fear of dilettantism, this is a Rav Aaron Lichtenstein word, has historically been a prime reason for the relatively limited level of Torah study by women. Given the changes in women's overall social and educational status and the nature of their total cultural experience within the modern world, many have felt that this benign neglect is no longer warranted, and indeed, since the turn of the century, much has been done to redress the imbalance in the Talmud Torah of men and women. How far this process will develop and whether it has built-in halachic limits remains to be seen, but that as it may, the axiological historical centrality of Talmud Torah remains a cardinal fact of Jewish spiritual existence. Okay, so that's one point that Rav Lichtenstein was noting in terms of the involvement of women in Talmud Torah, and specifically in Gemara study. Then in an article which is actually entitled Torah Study for Women, Rav Lichtenstein noted that the view of Torah study for women in general was always about teaching the things which they needed to know, but he presents, for example, a contradiction that would inevitably happen if you say that women could only learn Chumash with Rashi, for example, and then Rashi quotes Gemaras and Rashi quotes Mishnayos, but you've closed those off from women. But how do you teach that if they're not exposed to what that is? So Rav Lichtenstein wrote towards the end of this much shorter article. I'm not opposed to teaching women Talmud. From a practical point of view, this is somewhat difficult because many women seem to lack the motivation. The societal support is missing, and more importantly, there is lacking a desire to be unconditionally committed to such learning in the future. It's necessary to understand that in Talmud study, the first steps are difficult, and they do not naturally engage one's intense interest. This is acceptable to someone who views these steps as preparation for intensive future study, but for one who may remain at a beginner's level, the study is difficult. Since one should not be blind to present societal realities, it is clear that it is improbable that women will develop the same level of intensity as that of men. I'm also not convinced that it is desirable to press women to study Talmud in such an intensive form. After all, halacha does differentiate between men and women in this matter, and their respective life roles are also different. But when one speaks about the ability to study Page Talmud, to understand it and enjoy it, I see no reason to deny these teachings to women, and it is even necessary to establish this as an integral part of the school curriculum and actual shir. This is the way I teach my daughter, and so is my wife educated. This seems to me to be the recommended approach regarding the women of our generation. And he goes on. So I certainly agree with Rav Aaron Lichtenstein that when it comes to teaching any kind of Torah, there is no necessity to dumb it down. We have to teach it on the level that is appropriate for everyone in the room. But it's also recognized that I'm sure for some people this may be the first time, or if you've been studying with David before, of the first times. And so I'm sure David is going to work within that parameter to try to surely to make it engaging, but to also recognize that people are at different levels. And it's for two reasons: because of the language of the Mishnah on the one hand, though Hebrew, it's rabbinic Hebrew, and the language of the Gemara is Aramaic, which many people may not be familiar with. So all of that being said, that's why you have a translation in front of you, and that will make it at least easier to understand the translation of the words. That being said, there is dialogue, and there's back and forth, and there are challenges. The Gemara also often has narratives in it, or little stories, which are anecdotes, which are meant to help teach the lesson or the message along. That being said, as an introduction, Rav Lichtenstein said it's not easy. So brace yourself for the challenge that comes with, on the one hand, looking at a new language, and on the other hand, also a new way of presenting ideas, because the Gemara leaves a lot unsaid in the way that it speaks, and so your translation, or the commentary for sure, in the Quran which you have in front of you, will fill in a lot of gaps in the language and the dialogue that the Gemara presents to us. So just be mindful of that. I think that, if I'm not mistaken, Quran and Art School do the same thing, where the words which are translated directly from the Talmud are in bold, and everything else that they're filling in to help you understand what it's actually saying are not in bold. So you can see what is missing, and there's a lot more missing than that which is said. Okay, that being said, just as an introduction to Berachos opens us obviously to the topic of blessings, but blessings doesn't come until later on. It really begins by teaching us about davening. And davening is something which is important to us all. On the one hand, it's something which is commanded to us with respect to specifically the Shema, to read it in the evening and in the morning. And the main part of davening is Shemona Esrei, and these are things which are ultimately touched upon. And the main thing that we have to remember, certainly with the Shema, beyond the obligation of the tefillah component of it, is what it tells us in there. One of the things that is mentioned in the Shema is Vishinantam Levanecha V'dibarta Bam, which means that you shall teach it to your children and speak about it with them. And that is what Talmud study is. It is engaging in conversation about Jewish law and about Jewish practice. And as David said, I commend everybody for coming here, because it's something that we can all learn more about. And as much as I think that a class should run smoothly, part of the way Gemara operates is through challenges and questions. So keep them on topic, but ask questions. Challenge yourself to ask good questions, to get to the heart and the core of what the Talmud is trying to teach. And like Rav Lichtenstein said, raise the bar, raise the level. Don't say, oh, this is not something I've ever done before, so it's too hard or it's too difficult. Challenge yourself to make the most out of this time that you have learning together, and may it be a blessing for everyone here, and may, as David said, may it be a chus for our community as well, that we have Talmud Torah, not just Talmud Torah, but Talmud with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just to touch on one aspect of what Rabbi Bill had said, if you have questions, don't save them for the end. Ask them right away. No problem. You don't have to wait to ask the question. You don't have to raise your hand, speak out. This is going to be somewhat of a dialogue. So we started with Rabbi Billet. We're going to go to the Gemara. Then we're going to have what I call value added, where we're going to talk about something. Every week the value add is going to be different. Some interesting thing that I think is worth sharing with you. And we're going to do it all in 45 minutes. So we're already 15 minutes in, so we've got to get cracking. So the Gemara, the books that you have in front of you, if you open from the right side, it's going to be the Hebrew. If you open from the left side, it's going to be the Hebrew with English translation. This is what the page, the original page, looks like. So the transmission of Torah, Jewish law, started, we know, with Sinai, right? At Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, that Moshe Rabbeinu was given two Torahs, the oral law, which is the Gemara, and the written law, right? The written law is the scroll, the Torah scroll, the Chumash that we all know, and they were both given at the same time. One was written down, and one was intended to be transmitted, father to son, teacher to student, through generations. And we cannot understand the written law without the oral law. And there are many examples of this. We can all think of some. For example, an eye for an eye, right? We're very familiar with that, and there unfortunately there are certain cultures in the world today that take it literally, but we don't. And when we say an eye for an eye, it means that if somebody injures another party, there's got to be cash compensation. That's how it works. And there's a schedule of what the different types of injuries entail. How do we observe Shabbos? How do we do bris milah? What does it mean to wear tzitzis? There's so many different things, and the Torah is very brief. And so Mindel and I grew up, or we raised our children in North Jersey with Rabbi Teitz, and he used to say that the Torah is like a telegram, right? If you're all familiar with the telegram, you know, mom is on the roof, stop, right? And then you don't know what the rest of the story really is. If you want to know, I'll tell you that joke later. But it's the idea that it's a very, very brief comment, and then more and more, so maybe a letter or maybe a magazine article expands on it. And so we get a very brief statement, and then we need to understand what it really means. So just to start us off, the topic that we're talking about, brachos, as Rabbi Billet said, it's going to talk about brachos, blessings, and why do we even do them? What is the point of it? After all, we say that God created the world, He created it for us, we're entitled to enjoy the fruit, what happens in the world, and yet we're expected, before we eat, before we do many different things, we're expected to make a blessing, make a bracha. Why is that? So we're acknowledging the fact that there is a God in the world, and He is the creator, and He's the owner, and He allows us to enjoy what's going on, but we need to be grateful, we need to recognize what's happening. That's the blessing part of it. And then our Masechet, our tractate, begins with Kriya Shema, which is the basic Jewish prayer, like crystallized, summarized. And it can touch you, because if you read, for example, what some of the recently released hostages had to say about their time in captivity and when they were taken and so on, what was in their mind, what was on their lips? There were so many of them. It was this, Shema Yisrael, right? They said it over and over again. And maybe you've had times in your life when something happened and you needed that sort of reinforcement. You know, I can think back one time very early in our business career when, you know, Mindel and I at one time when we were, I guess in our 20s, we owned a couple of kosher food stores that we established, and one particular time we were having a hard time paying the electric bill to keep all the refrigeration going. And public service came down and they disconnected our power. And here we were, you know, 24, 25 years old, all this frozen food in the freezer, and I had to go downtown to New Brunswick and beg them basically to turn the power back on. I couldn't pay, we didn't have the money, but we had to convince them that we were good for it. And while I was waiting for the person to come in, that was what was going through my mind, that was what I was saying. So that basic prayer, Shema Yisrael, is the beginning. And so if we take a look at the Torah, what does the Torah actually say? Because remember, what we're going to be doing in this class is that we take nothing for granted, right? Everything that we're going to say can be tested. The rabbi said challenge. So the Jewish religion is not a blind faith religion. We're not to just accept what we're told. We have a right, we have an obligation really to understand it. And understanding means ask questions, challenge. How do you know that? And in the Gemara, we're going to find later on, the most common question that's asked is, Mina hani mili, how do you know? Where is the source for what you're saying? You're telling me something, prove it to me, right? And that's our job, is to prove it and to know it and to understand it. And then we're going to have the power of that understanding. So what does the Torah actually say? So if you read the Torah, and this is in Parshas V'eschanan, it's in Devarim, chapter 6, verse 7. So it says, and the rabbi quoted it, Vishinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam, teach it to your children, speak in it, and then b'shivtecha v'visecha v'lechato b'derech, when you are sitting at home or when you're traveling on the road. In other words, this obligation does not stop because you're not home, right? When you lie down and when you get up. Right? So that's gonna be what's gonna be occupying us today. What does it mean when I lie down, when I get up? Does it mean if I take a nap in the afternoon? Does it mean if I work the midnight shift? You know, does it mean midnight for me or midnight for you? Is it midnight by the clock? How do we define the middle of the day? All these different things, and we're gonna find out what it actually means. So, in my experience working with groups like this, women want to know the bottom line, and they want to know what is the end of the story. In the Gemara, a lot of times we're not going to necessarily get a bottom line, but we have, in understanding halacha, we have many sources, and what I'm going to be reading to you is from what's called Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch was written in the 16th century by Rav Yosef Karo. He was Sephardic. Later on came along the Ramah, who was Ashkenaz, and they kind of combined together these books. And later on, there have been, in 19th century, came the Mishnah Brura. This book is called Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. It's abbreviated, but it gives you the basics with some comments that came along later on. So we're talking about the time. What is the right time to say Kriya Shema at night, right? And so he says like this. He says, "Man Kriya Shema shel Tefillah shel Arvis." The proper time to read the Shema in the evening prayer, Mishenirim Gimel Kachavim Katanim. When you see 3 small stars, not 3 big stars, 3 small stars. Ubiyom hamu'unan, so suppose it's a cloudy day, right? Yam tenach yetzia safek mi libo. Wait until you have, there's no doubt in your mind that it's nighttime, right? V'achshav, and nowadays, nohagin lihispalo b'tzibur ma'ariv techef achar mincha. It's customary, and most shuls operate like this. It's difficult enough to get people to come to shul twice a day. Get them to come 3 times a day is very difficult. So they'll generally combine mincha and mariv. Right? They'll daven mincha. Maybe there'll be a brief pause in between. Here in shul, Rabbi Bill gives a short shir for a few minutes in between mincha and mariv, and then we daven mariv. When we daven mariv, it's not really dark, generally speaking. Some places they'll have what they call a plod mincha, which is an early mincha, because there's an earliest time, a latest time. But generally speaking, in shul, mariv is not daven when it's dark, because it's inconvenient for people, right? Afal pi shadayin eino laila, even though it's not really nightfall, b'nei Torah chatzibur, because it's difficulty on the congregation to require it. Shei Torah lesof chatzibur shenis, because it's difficult to gather the congregation a second time, which is really a third time in the day, right? Ubevad shelo yehei kodem plag hamincha. However, at least you can daven mariv, but never before plag hamincha. What does plag hamincha mean?
Earliest time.
Pardon?
Earliest time.
So the day, our day is a 24-hour day, right? And the nighttime and the daytime are not always exactly 12 hours, right? I mean, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., they're not always light or dark during those times. And what we look at halachic hours, halachic day. So, for example, I don't know, what time was sunrise this morning? Somewhere around 7 o'clock, something like that. Pardon? Yeah,
I have a question.
Sure.
Regarding Laura.
absolutely.
Is it more important to daven at the proper time rather than it's darker? I mean, this applies maybe more to men, I guess, than to daven with a minion?
Okay, so we're gonna get into that.
Oh, okay.
We're gonna get into it. So, short answer is the main issue is when do you say Kriya Shema? Because we just read from the Chumash says, when you lie down, right? So that means when you lie down at night. So it's important that you say Kriya Shema when it's dark, when it's nighttime, right? So the rest of it, maybe not so much, but the Kriya Shema. And we're gonna get into what to do about the fact that we're davening here when it's not really nighttime. So what time was sunrise this morning? 7:30, okay? 7:10. Okay, and what time is sunset?
Sunset is at, 1 second.
Isn't there a difference of opinion as to when Plava Mincha is according to the Ramah and according to?
I'm sorry you mentioned that. That's true too, yeah.
1 minute left, 1 minute about 44.
So what time?
5:44.
5:44. Okay, so roughly 7 o'clock until 6 o'clock, roughly. Okay, and I'm just saying roughly because we're not going to do the exact calculation, but that means that really we have 11 hours, right? But halachically we need to have a 12-hour day. So that means we multiply 11 times 60, 660 minutes divided by 12, and that's how we get a halachic hour.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
I will see you next week.
Okay, thank you. So the point is, we have a 12-hour day, but it's 12 halachic hours, that's number one. And now the question of Plag HaMincha, so now at the midday point, plus an hour and a quarter, a halachic hour and a quarter, that's called Plag HaMincha. That's the midpoint of the afternoon, and that's the earliest time that you could daven Ma'ariv. You can daven Mincha after midday, but Ma'ariv there's an earlier point for the Plag HaMincha. So the point is, what he's saying is that we're going to be davening Ma'ariv, and it's not really nighttime, because you can't fool Mother Nature. Either it's dark or it's not dark, right? No matter how you make the clock work, no matter what you say, if it's not dark, it's not dark, right? And therefore, when it's not dark, it's not the proper time for Kriya Shema. But since it's so difficult, really, and they're recognizing the fact that we're living in a world and people go to work, people have obligations, to get people to come out an extra time, come from Mincha, go home, come back, it's not going to happen, right? So therefore, kiyaz afilu v'diavad einam yotzim. So he says, saying Kriya Shema at that early time before it's dark, you did not really fulfill your requirement. Therefore, what? Praiseworthy is somebody who has the opportunity to daven Ma'ariv with a minyan at night. So you'll see there's some places that will have a late Ma'ariv, maybe 8:30, 9 o'clock, people come back after they've had supper or whatever. So you'll see that. Ubein mincha l'Ma'ariv osek b'Torah, and between mincha and Ma'ariv, he'll study Torah, l'chaber halayla imayom b'Torah, shu inyan godol. It's a big deal, basically, to connect the evening with the morning, the day, and the night, to be learning Torah. V'al kol panim roi l'chol yirei shemayim, and in any event, everybody who is a God-fearing person, shemis pala b'tzibur kodem halayla, that if he did daven together with the congregation before nightfall, which is what we do here every day, right? Lo yochal kodem halayla el yamtin, should wait till it's dark before you eat your dinner, right? Miyad lachar tzeisa kochavim, and after the stars come out, those three little stars, Yikra Gimel Parshas Shel Kriya Shema. Read the 3 chapters of Kriya Shema. So you can say it together with the minyan when you're davening Mariv early, but when it gets dark, say it yourself. So then you'll fulfill your obligation to have said Kriya Shema at night. Okay?
Is that what's in the Siddur as Kriyat Shema Shalita? Is that what's in the Siddur?
Kriya Shema and Amit, we're going to get that in a second.
That's something
Can I
else.
So,
Can I ask something?
sure.
You're saying one thing is the way it should be and one thing is the way it is. Basically,
Okay,
right?
right.
So, is this something that the rabbis established or Hashem established?
Okay. So ideally, we're going to daven Shacharis in the morning. Best possible case is the middle when dawn breaks, right? And that's why we have here. We have an early minyan, right? They call it a Nate's minyan, whatever, because they're saying Shemon Esrei at the, it should be ideally exact time the day breaks. Mincha is in the afternoon. Mincha is a little more flexibility. Mariv after dark. That would be the ideal if you could do it. And I guess people who are studying yeshiva, they can all day they can do that. However, recognizing life as it really is, Shacharis one thing, but Mincha and Mariv tend to be davened at the same, pretty close to the same time in most shuls, because of the fact that it's just not practical. It's not practical to have people come back a third time. Sometimes some people will, but what's the problem? The problem is that we're told Kriya Shema in the evening should be said when it's dark at night. So there's no getting around that. That's the correct thing to do. You can daven Mariv early, but you have to say the Kriya Shema when it's dark. So what happens here, and in many shuls, I don't know what most shuls in America, I haven't been to all of them yet, but in most shuls, that's kind of what happens, that they'll daven Mincha as late as possible, and then they're going to daven Mariv right away afterwards, after maybe a short break. But that doesn't solve the problem of saying Kriya Shema when it's dark. So that's up to you. When you get home, when it gets dark, you say Kriya Shema. Some places they actually announce the time when that could happen. We don't happen to do that here, but some places they do that. But the point is that there is a set time. There is a standard that we are to uphold, and that's the Torah law as understood and interpreted by the rabbis. What they've done is that they've given us this leniency to allow us to recognize what our life is really like, and to daven Mariv shortly after we daven Mincha, even though it's not dark yet. But we're going to fulfill the obligation to say Kriya Shema when it's dark. The Kriya Shema that we say on the bed at night, that one, you'll fulfill your obligation by saying the first chapter. You don't have to say all 3 chapters of Kriya Shema, right? So if you're using that to satisfy your requirement to say Kriya Shema when it gets dark, it doesn't exactly work. So you have to, it doesn't solve the problem for you. And he's going to tell you this. He says, you read the Umisha Eino Mispalo B'Tzibur, but if you don't daven with a minyan, so suppose for whatever reason it doesn't work for you to get to shul, also lo hispalo tevilas arvis kodem seisach kochavim. You're not permitted to daven Mariv before it gets dark, right? Because the whole reason why we daven early is for the convenience. Convenience is kind of a tough word to use, but it's a recognition that gathering people up a third time is going to be very difficult to do. But if you're in your own home or wherever you are, that's not an issue for you. So wait until it gets dark if you're davening by yourself.
After the kids go to bed.
Pardon?
After the kids go to bed.
After the kids go to bed, whatever is going on in your life.
No, they do that.
Oh, they do, so they do Shema in Shul.
I'm
Even
not-
though it's too early,
Yeah.
they still say Shema in the.
Sure, because that's part of the
So then when they get home, they have
Smart.
to say it again.
when they get home, when it gets dark, they should
again.
say it again, right? Okay. So what you have here, this is an enlargement of what the the page in the Gemara looks like. So if you open up from the right side, right, this is what you're going to see. And the way this is done, this actually was put together by a Christian printer in the 1500s in Venice, I think was the first one, because the Gemara was not printed. It was not allowed to be printed. Somehow or other, the Pope had control, and he gave a license to a Christian family named Bamberg, and they, I guess with the help of the Jewish staff, put together the page, pretty much what it looks like. This is what we have here is the Vilna Shas, because there was certain disputes over which was going to be accepted, but the basic way that it's done, this is from like 16th century, and it's still the same today, and you're going to see it in your book. And the way that it's done is that in the center portion, we have the actual Talmud itself. So we start out, the first part is called the Mishnah. The Mishnah is, if you're going to take that telegraph analogy, right? That is short form telling you what the rules are. Okay, that's the Mishnah, and that was written in Israel. It's written in Hebrew, and it was done from, let's say, 50 or 60 years before the Common Era till about 200 years in. And around the year 200, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi sealed it. It was, they say that they call the Torah Shiva al Peh, that they say the oral law. It's not exactly true that it was completely oral, because many people kept notes, right? Not everybody was able to remember the whole thing like that. They kept notes, and what actually took place is that Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Akiva managed to gather a lot of this information, and his student Rabbi Meir organized it, and then Rabbi Yehuda Nasi sealed it. And at his death around the year 200, that was the end of the Mishnah. And then and the people who were the authors of the various Mishnayos are called Tanaim. And so you have the Mishnah, which is what we're going to be dealing with. There's also what's called Brisa. Brisa means outside, which is authoritative comments written by Tanoim, but didn't make it into the main Mishnah. But they're going to be quoting that many times. And then after that, the next about 300 years, you had what's called the Gemara. Now the Gemara, generally you're going to see like this an abbreviation of Gimel Mem, that means it stands for Gemara. That was written by, it was done by a group of people called Amoraim, and they were operating for about 300 years afterwards. And then the Gemara was sealed with about year 500 of the Common Era, and it was done by Ravina and Ravashi. And it stayed like that for a number of years. After that, you had the Gaonim, Anshe Knesset Agadola, various other groups. And along came Rashi. Rashi came along in the 12th century. He was a German rabbi, and he made the commentary. Without Rashi, we could not understand the Gemara. And I'm going to show you that.
What's the difference between the Mishnah, the Gemara, and the Brisa?
Okay. So the Mishnah is going to be very concise, generally speaking, short sentences, and it's going to lay down what the law is. The Gemara is going to expand upon it. The Mishnah and the Brisa were contemporary. They were written by, or authored by people called Tanaim around the same time, roughly a 250-year span of time. Sorry, little allergies today. And the Gemara came along afterwards. The Gemara is expanding on the Mishnah and the Brisa. The Mishnah and the Brisa are contemporary, just that The Mishnah made it into our books, the Brisa didn't, but the Brisas are going to be quoted pretty frequently. You get it, Sharon? Or?
Yeah, I'm thinking of a timeline in my mind of the.
Yeah.
Okay, so just picture before the turn of the century, before we got into the Common Era, that's when the Mishnah started, and it ran about 200 years into that. Okay, and then with the death of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who actually, in many cases, he's the author. A lot of times you're going to see a Mishnah without an author, and that usually is going to be Rabbi Meir, who pretty much compiled a lot of it or most of it. And then after that finished, the next group, the next people who were studying are called Amoraim, and they went for about 300 years, still around the year 500, and it was sealed by Ravina and Ravashi. Those are the two scholars who sealed it. And so that's pretty much permanent. That's what we have. But the Torah and the Talmud is alive. We're part of it. We're all part of it. It's not like, like they say, the dusty tomes of the ancient Hebrews. That's not what this is about. This is something that's alive, and every one of us can contribute to it. We have a right to offer an opinion. Maybe we think of something that nobody else thought of before. And very often we're going to see discussions about things that actually never become the law. They'll give opinions. Why don't we do it this way? Why don't we try that way? And people ask, well, why do we go through all of this? Why don't we have, and we're going to see some of that today. It's because at some point in the future, somebody's going to say, well, why don't we do it that way? And if the Gemara had never treated it, somebody would say, well, yeah, maybe you're right. But they say, no, we don't do it this way, and this is why. And it was dealt with before. So a lot of it, which is going to seem extraneous, is not really extraneous at all. It's going to help us to focus and find out what is the real fact. So I think we're kind of running a little short on time. So I'm just going to start the Mishnah. I'm just going to do a little bit of it, and then I'm going to do the value added, and we're going to call
Why
it.
can't you extend the time?
That's a good question. Thank you very much. And I've always felt that I'd rather have people say, "Why did you leave so soon?" instead of "Why did you stay so long?" So the Mishnah starts, Me'emasai Koran Shema Ba'arvi. From what time? Okay, so right away, what do we have? We have a principle here that there is a standard time. Me'emas, from when? If we decide, it's convenient for me, Nindo and I had errands to run this morning, and we weren't sure we were going to be back on time, and so it would have been very easy for me. I finished up davening. I was finished here by 20 after 8. I could have davened Mincha and Marav in about 10 minutes, and I would be done for the day, right? But the Mishnah said, no. There is a time to do it. So you daven Marav at a set time. You say Kriya Shema for Marav at a set time. So what is the time? And we're going to, every line that we're going to be learning has a lot behind it, and there are principles we're going to be learning. So, what is the answer? Mishah sheha-kahanim nichnasim lechol b'trumasan. From the time that the Kohanim go in to eat their truma. What is that? What is truma, after all? Anybody know? So truma is, I'm a farmer, and I grow dates and figs in Israel, and before I can eat that crop, I need to do several things, right? I need to separate the tithes, and the first gift that comes out of that is what's called truma. It's given to the Kohanim, right? And interestingly, the Torah doesn't specify how much to give. It says give. And what has come down through the ages is that the normal gift is 2%, 1 in 50. If you are generous, you give 1 in 40. If you are stingy, 1 in 60. But there's no set number, right? So 2% is accepted. But the point is, the Kohanim get the truma. But why do they have to eat it at night? I mean, why can't they eat it all in the daytime? So we're going to learn something, an interesting principle, where there is a concept that if a person has become tameh, a person has become ritually impure, and there are many different ways that can happen, where you can come in contact with certain dead rodents or lizards or whatever, or maybe contact with a corpse or some other type of thing. And part of the purification process is immersion in the mikveh. But pardon?
And tamei at ha'erev.
It's right, Tamei Arab. So very good, Naomi. You go into the mikveh, but the tumah is not completely removed until the nightfall, until the day passes. So that's the point. That's what they're talking about. A kohen who cannot eat truma if he's in a state of truma. If he can't eat the truma when he is tamei, he goes into the mikveh, but he can't eat it until it's dark, right? So that's what that's all about. Okay, and next time we're going to elaborate on that a little bit more. So the question that I wanted to ask you is, can a Jew play the lottery? Right? There's a big lottery in Florida right now. Can Jews play the lottery? After all, it's gambling. Jews are not supposed to gamble. And the answer is that the lottery itself is not considered to be gambling, because nobody expects to win, really. So the problem with gambling, so if we sat down and we played a card game, we all want to win, and we figured that we're going to win. So not to say I know there's a lot of pinochle playing, a poker playing, all that, but
Mahjong.
well, mahjong. My mother used to play mahjong, but the women put the money down before they started, right? If they played for money, whatever was the amount, they all put the money down, and then they played for the chips. So it wasn't a question of not paying, because if you lose in gambling, you don't really want to pay. So the person who is taking it is like stealing in a certain sense. But a lottery is not like that, because it's basically something you don't expect to win. But okay, so if you're allowed to play the lottery, how many tickets should you buy? So the Lubavitcher Rebbe had a comment about it, and he said, if God wills it that you win, one ticket is enough to accomplish the job. So but where did he get that? Is there a scriptural source for that idea? So there's a famous story about Yehonasan, the son of Shaul HaMelech, and the Jews were camped, and there was a camp of Plishtim above them, a hilltop above, and nobody knew what was the size of the camp of the Plishtim, what was going to be the outcome of the war. And Yonasan did a reconnoiter. He went to take a look to see what was going on, and he went together with his arm bearer. I don't know what you would call it. It's like a squire, or whatever. He said, "Vayomer Yonasan el hanar nose kelev." He said to the person who carried the weapons for him, we're going to go and take a look. What's the situation with them? Because maybe Hashem is going to make a miracle for us, but we need to investigate. If God is going to make a miracle, it doesn't matter how many soldiers we have. If God is going to make us win, it doesn't matter if we're a large army or a small army. It's the miracle of God, and we've seen it in our own lifetimes, thank God. It's how often the Jewish armies were outnumbered by such huge amounts. But if God is going to make a miracle, God can do it with a small number or a large number. So he says, and what was the response of this boy who was carrying the weapons? Do what is in your heart, he said to him. And I'm with you. I'm with you. My heart is with your heart. So Yonasan had a stratagem. He said, we're going to walk. So he found a path through the mountains, and we're going to reveal ourselves. He wanted them to see us, right? In Ko Yomru Elenu, if they say to us, Domu ad hagiyenu alechem, stay there and wait till we get to come to you. In other words, Yonasan and his assistant are going to walk up this mountain pass, and if the enemy on top said, wait down there, we're going to come and check you out, he said, in that case, he says, V'amanu tachtenu lo nala, and we won't go up. Im ko yomru, but if they say the following, Alu aleinu, that you come up to us, Walinu kina sanam Hashem b'yodenu, v'zed lano os. In other words, if the enemy is not afraid of us, if they're going to come and check us out, that's one thing. But if they're so afraid that they see two people coming, but they want us to come to them, that shows you that they have the fear, and we're going to win. And what happened? So via Golul Shem El Matzav Plishtim, so they revealed themselves. V'yomer Plishtim Hinei Ivrim Yotzim Min Achorim Asher Yischabu Sham. So they made derogatory comment to Plishtim. They said, "Here come the Jews coming out of the holes where they were hiding." Vayanu Anshe Amatzava Es Yonasan Vesnose Kelev, and they said to him, "Yom Alu Elenu, come up to us." And we'll tell you something. So now he said to him, he said, follow me, because God has given them into our hands. And that's just what happened. They went up, and the two of them together killed about 20 of the enemy soldiers. And such a noise was made because of all this confusion, that the Jewish army that was down below woke up, and they all come up in the mountains, and it was a big rout, and the Plishtim ran away. And the point was that a small number, it can be just as effective if God is behind it. So, according to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, if you're going to buy a lottery ticket, you can buy one ticket, and it's just as good as buying 10 or 50 or 100 tickets. So, hopefully this is not going to be a gamble for everybody. This is going to be effective, and we hope to see you back next week.
Thank you very much.